the education system failing us? And I venture to say yes, in a big way, a major way, a wave, a tsunami, if you will, that will cascade and eventually hit us hard. Um, and I think the effects will be felt in the next few years. So let's go ahead and break down what it is about the education system that's failing us. So first and foremost, um, one of the major ways is through grade inflation. So it is now more easier than ever to get better grades. With doing less, you could essentially breathe and graduate. Um, and I'm referring to K through 12 education in particular. Although even in college, I would venture to say that there's probably some grade inflation there as well, because the level at which most students are coming into school is lower. So hence the standards need to lower as well. And where does that come from? Where does that stem from? It stems from the concept of equity, which is basically we're going to level the playing field for everyone. And so you make the bottom the priority, the tyranny of the minority. And so what you're left with is a system that prioritizes and prizes um, less effort. And it makes it easier for people that otherwise wouldn't have passed to pass. So these are the people that eventually get into positions, and unfortunately, maybe even positions of power. And that's what you're left with. The other thing is there's a concept of restorative justice, which was a response to this so-called, I don't know if it's true or not, I beg to differ, but the whole concept of the school to prison pipeline, as if that was a real thing. And so what ends up happening is you essentially have no consequences, all of the privilege and none of the responsibility. And so if there are no consequences, you're not mimicking the real world. You're creating an artificial reality in which you can do what you wish. And in your mind, in the mind of a young person, they think I can get away with this. And then they get into the real world and they get a real dose of reality and can't seem to handle it, I think. And a lot of them are going to have a hard time navigating that world, because everything up until that point told them they can get away with whatever they wanted. And so you go from people telling you how to do certain things to nobody. The guardrails have been lifted. And so that's a major problem, is that there are no consequences. You could say and do whatever you want and you're back the next day. And so that's a big part of it as well. And so where does that whole idea comes from? What the concept is, well, we want to give students a second chance. We want people to learn how to make mistakes. But if there's no consequences to your actions, like, then how do you learn that what you're doing is wrong? No, they think, oh, we'll talk our way out of it. We'll have healing circles. I mean, everything about this is a feminine imposition on human behavior, on antisocial behavior, even more sinisterly. And so that's a big part of it. Um, what else? The other thing is too is like staffs in general are becoming more feminized. K through 12 education, you look at the data. Universities, you look at the demographics, right, in terms of the genders in which the positions are being filled, and almost always is it women that are entering these types of jobs. And so naturally, the position and sort of the culture around education is becoming more feminine, and that obviously benefits a certain section of the population, but not everyone. Especially young, rambunctious boys are gonna have a hard time towing the line. And so if you take away every and each way that they can learn how to become men, they never learn, right? They just become prolonged adolescents. They just become grown-ups, but never actually men. They grow old but not become men. And I think a big part of it is that push. The other thing is too is the workplace has become very politicized. If you're in a blue state, then the education that's being pushed is very much blue. I remember walking into a classroom one time and seeing a teacher, and they were breaking down a music video, and it was just all the buzzword, all the leftist sort of talking points, right? The policing of bodies, the patriarchy, and this and that. And I'm thinking to myself, is this really what education is? This is what it boils down to. We're watching women in hardly any clothing, and ninth graders are dissecting this information and trying to figure out the patriarchy. I was like, this is crazy. I was like, I don't even understand how this is part of the curriculum. But when you do away with canons, when you say anything and everything has its value, has its place, is culturally relevant, then you're left with this kind of garbage, right? You're not going to put this on par with a Penguins classic, with anything that sort of created the Republic and turned it into what it is. You're not going to compare those two. Even in like a Lord of the Flies, like things that they used to make us read, The Giver. I'd even take Night at this point, you know. I'd take that stuff over this trash that we're trying to push as if it has any relevancy. And that's part of it too, is that the people that are in these educational spheres are bringing this stuff that they're getting from universities and bringing it into the K through 12 system. And so eventually all these theories that they push get funneled into the K through 12 system and legitimize, and nobody bats an eye. I mean, just because it is the party line, nobody thinks it's wrong. Imagine if I had done something that was more on the conservative end, you could imagine the pushback on that. So it's just because it's what's in style, and so therefore there isn't any pushback on it. But if I was a parent, I'd be very troubled by this stuff. And yeah, mainly in line with that whole thing is also just kind of like that wokeness, that sense of wokeness, right? You got rainbow flags everywhere. You have people's beliefs being publicly sort of displayed so for people to see. And I feel like that, since when did that become okay? I've always been more so like private in regards to, I don't want anybody to know what I think about anything, because at the end of the day, I'm supposed to be educating. I'm not really in a position to tell someone how to behave, or, I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't want anybody to think of me differently based on my beliefs. Because at the end of the day, like, what I believe or what I think should have no bearing on what I teach per se. I don't think that those two are mutually exclusive at all. Because for me, it's like I value and cherish tolerating the intolerant, even if the intolerant don't tolerate me. That is that whole paradox of tolerance, is that I will tolerate the intolerant, but the intolerant will not tolerate me. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just like, this is what happens when you allow these kind of people to take these positions that I think are super important, right? Because the idea is we're supposed to be educating the future, right? These young people are going to be entering the workforce eventually, and the last thing you need is to be at the hospital and so doesn't know how to save you because they didn't read the book properly, right? And they passed because of some metric of the oppression Olympics that allowed them to get to where they got to. I mean, it's literally, the absurdity of the whole thing is just, it's like a caricature of reality. And then you wonder, like, when will we start to feel the effects of the fallout? And when will we start seeing the effects of the failures of the education system, that rewards anything different and doesn't place enough value on competency and the utility of being industrious, of being creative, those things? It doesn't take that into account. It doesn't value those things more. It's so obsessed, so freakishly obsessed with diversity and inclusion and safe spaces and all those buzzwords, that it sidesteps any sort of logical rationale for why it exists the way it does. And so you're left with this sort of playground, you sort of utopic landscape that really is just, it's just not going to get us very far. It's not, what we did to get here will not be sustainable, will not be around any longer if we continue on this path. So anyhow, so is the education system failing us? Sadly, it is. It is the institutional aspect of it. It absolutely is. The bare minimum of what it gives, what it provides, is an absolute atrocity. I'm sorry to say this, but on an individual basis, though, however, on a more positive note, you can sort of get your own education. You can just go and get a bunch of Penguin classics, all of the classics, read the canons. They're classics for a reason, and probably get a better education that way than you could going through a public school K through 12 education system right now. It really is laughable what is going on there. And maybe there's going to be some exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, it's a very troubling landscape. The education system in general, the people that are in it, the people that it attracts are people that are mentally unstable, and unfortunately these are the people that our students have to deal with all the time. The young generation has to deal with all the time. May God bless your souls. But anyways, I hope this helps, and I'll see you on the next one.